Good evening, I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily News for Friday, March 4th. And tonight, we begin with an extraordinary meeting in Brussels, where Foreign Minister Melanie Joly joined her fellow NATO ministers to discuss the worsening situation within Ukraine. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says the alliance will not police a no-fly zone over Ukraine and warned such a move could end in a widespread war in Europe. Mr. Stoltenberg says NATO won't move into Ukraine, either on land or the Ukrainian airspace. And no radiation was released after Russia attacked Europe's biggest nuclear power plant in Ukraine overnight. Also, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will leave this weekend for Europe to meet with Canada's allies to further discuss their united response to the invasion. This comes as Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland says the, quote, incredibly brave, incredibly spirited resistance shown by Ukrainians working to repel Russia's military advances is inspiring her fellow G7 finance ministers, and other Western allies to find new ways to penalize Russia. Canada has removed Russia and its ally Belarus from its most favored nation list of trade partners, subjecting their exports to 35% tariffs. Meanwhile, efforts continue to help Ukrainians escaping Russia's invasion. The Canadian Council for Refugees says it hopes the temporary visas set a precedent for how Canada handles future conflicts. Immigration Minister Sean Fraser has announced Canada will allow an unlimited number of Ukrainians to apply for an expedited visa to stay for 2 years. This is without conditions like language requirements or labor market impact assessments. CCR Executive Director Janet Dench says the decision is positive, but the question remains about why similar opportunities have not been offered in other circumstances, including the crisis in Afghanistan. Switching gears here to a mammoth media acquisition deal that's concerning federal officials. Federal Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne says he shares many of the concerns about Rogers' proposed acquisition of Shaw. The proposed Rogers-Shaw deal, which was announced in 2021, is currently under review by 3 federal regulators. Ottawa says it will block the wholesale transfer of Shaw's wireless licenses to Rogers, while Rogers says it still expects its $26 billion takeover to close in the first half of this year. The COVID-19 pandemic may feel like it's tailing off for some, but a top doctor at Indigenous Services Canada says that's not the case for Indigenous communities, which are still being disproportionately affected by COVID-19. Deputy Chief Medical Officer Dr. Evan Adams says with 88% of people aged 12 and older in Indigenous communities being vaccinated, the need remains for targeted public health measures. He added that he recognizes people feel tired because of COVID-19, but hopes spring will bring new energy. Spring will also see changes within Ontario Premier Doug Ford's cabinet. Ontario Health Minister and Deputy Premier Christine Elliott won't be running in the June provincial election. She says Premier Ford has asked her to continue working with his government and that she will continue in her role as health minister until the spring. Mr. Ford says Ms. Elliott has been a close personal friend to him for decades and has supported him since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Ms. Elliott made 3 unsuccessful attempts to become leader of Ontario's Progressive Conservative Party. Canada's fight against plastic waste seems to be getting off to a bad start. Canada's Environment Minister says the country is doing a poor job tracking waste exports. This is despite setting a goal to reach a zero plastic waste economy by the end of the decade. Stephen Guilbeault says Canada must do more to ensure that any plastic waste it exports for recycling actually gets recycled. Canada agreed to add plastic to the types of waste exports that require informed consent of the importing nation and tracking of the disposal. However, Canada later signed a separate deal with the U.S. to keep sending plastic waste south of the border. This, even though the U.S. is not a party to the convention and is not bound by any of its rules. A small Ontario-based Ukrainian-Canadian shipping company is asking for help in getting aid packages to Ukraine. Meast Corporation started sending donated items to Ukraine this week with the help of dozens of volunteers who have been helping to pack, sort, and label the goods flooding into the company's warehouses. Meast says it can no longer afford to keep sending the hundreds of thousands of kilograms of donations. Time for a look at Team Canada at the 13th Winter Paralympics. Flag bearers Ina Forrest and Greg Westlake led Canada's team of Paralympic athletes into the stadium at the opening ceremony. Canada has 49 athletes competing in hockey, curling, alpine, and more. All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back with our energy update on Forum Daily. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Up next is Forum Daily's Energy Update with GasWizard.ca's senior petroleum analyst Dan McTeague. All yours, Dan.
Well, thank you for that, Nima. And boy, what a week it has been. Perhaps I shouldn't have wished for those predictions last week, which turned out to be spectacularly true, but even I couldn't have seen prices move up this quickly. We are obviously in record territory with average prices in Canada now moving towards $1.72 to $1.75 a litre. That means provinces like Newfoundland with much higher taxes now in the $1.91, $1.92 range, up a full 20 cents a litre from last week. British Columbia's Vancouver up now well over 20 cents a litre to $2. That's hard to say, $2.01 a litre. Even areas where there is far less tax and even home to our petroleum industry, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, still struggling to keep prices down, but between $1.58 and $1.61 to $1.63. And of course, Ontario, which has seen a dramatic increase of 18 cents a litre. What makes this most interesting, Nima, isn't so much the price of gasoline, but the price of the fuel that runs our economy. Yes, in fact, you need it to make windmills and solar panels, and you definitely need it to make EVs, the polymers, the resins, the asphalt, and the tires. Anyone who thinks those things are hydrocarbon oil-free are kidding themselves. Diesel prices in one day went up 44 cents a gallon, the equivalent of about 14 cents a litre. That's never happened before. And the period of time from this Monday till Wednesday saw the biggest rise in energy prices we have ever witnessed. And yes, on the heels of the invasion by Russia, but I think reality now sinking in and confirming what we have been saying here at the forum for the past several months, that in fact, the global shortage of oil caused by green policies that we saw in Europe have now spread to the rest of the world. Green policies that have fueled and financed Vladimir Putin's attack on Ukraine have left many regions of the world vulnerable and exposed. And that now Canada, which has really refused to provide any more pipelines going east or west to tidewaters, isn't just now part of the problem when it could have been the solution. It's now meaning Canadians are from coast to coast are seeing record energy prices. The news here is that these prices are going to stay, and they're going to stay for a while, regardless of whether or not there is resolution, and one hopes that there will be. But even without Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we are still dealing with a significant global supply problem in the sense that there isn't enough production, and green policies have really sapped the ability for producers to want to get back into the game. Even at $110 a barrel, many are still reluctant to get back into the game. And why would they? Because they're only going to be attacked by folks that are out there with a policy of saying, fossil fuels are evil. Reality is now going to start to sink in, and this is going to be a long-term high prices. And I expect that this week across Canada, we're going to see gas prices move up, probably an average of about 5 cents a litre, but anything could happen. Any particular example of issue could take grip. And so we could see prices in Canada move up towards the $1.80 range, which means, how far are we from $2 a litre? Well, the federal government continues its insanity with a carbon tax of another 2.5 cents a litre. Then I think we're heading towards that direction. We shift from winter to summer gasoline. I don't think we're going to see demand destruction, certainly when it comes to diesel, as it's used for agricultural products and food and everything else, and transport, vessels, trains, et cetera. So I think what we're now looking at is a scenario where the energy crunch, this high price, is going to continue to dog the market for the foreseeable future. And in that context, expect week to week over increases about 5 cents a litre on average. I think policymakers are going to have to decide to drop carbon taxes, remit some of the GST and HST that federal and provincial governments are making. Look, This is not going to be an easy time, but there is a crisis. It's called an energy crisis, and it's bringing about a global crisis in security. And the sooner our politicians and demagogues clue into that, the sooner they're going to be able to help Canadians who are being hard pressed. At this stage, all we can do is continue to tell them why. If they choose to ignore it, they do so at their own peril. This time next week, we'll be giving more bad news, but at least you've had a heads up. Nima, looking forward to doing this again next week, and fill her up and hang in there as best as you can. We'll talk to you. Thanks, Nima.
As usual, a lot to consider when it comes to energy, Dan. Thanks for that. That was Dan McTeague, Senior Petroleum Analyst at GasWizard.ca and President of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Stay with us. We'll return after the break with a look at cryptocurrencies and digital assets with Catherine Murray, the host of The Buck Stops Here. We'll be right back on Forum Daily News. Welcome back. Up next, Forum Daily's cryptocurrency and digital asset update with Catherine Murray. Catherine is the host of The Buck Stops Here, and she joins us now. Take it away.
Thanks, Dima. Hello, everyone, and welcome to your cryptocurrency and digital asset update. I am Catherine Murray. Well, what a week it has been in digital assets. Last week, when we, of course, learned that Russia was invading Ukraine, we saw crypto assets decline in lockstep with the equity markets or any type of risk asset class. But it's been a change of tone in the digital asset over the past week. We've actually seen moves higher, significant moves higher in Bitcoin, as well as Solana. Those two coins up by 17% over the past 10 trading days, with a real reversal in thinking here. Bitcoin now trading at about 43,000. There was a tight correlation previously as people were viewing cryptocurrencies as a risk-on asset. But now they are looking at it as a safer store of value and back to thinking about Bitcoin as a digital gold. Also, of course, an inflation hedge, specifically as we expect interest rates are going to be rising. Interestingly as well, that when we think about the Ukraine-Russia situation, there's more and more calls for Bitcoin to be monitored as well when we think about the sanctions on Russia. In fact, Senator Elizabeth Warren is calling on U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen to make sure that we are monitoring Bitcoin use from Russia, and specifically the Russians that are on the sanction list. We're also hearing that the New York Department of Financial Services is planning to increase their transaction monitoring of crypto use, crypto businesses specifically, and beefing up their sanctions against Russia. They're going to be using blockchain technology to try to determine if this is in fact happening. Interestingly as well, Binance, which is the largest crypto exchange, will not ban Russia from using Bitcoin or using their exchange, but will, of course, be compliant with the Russians who are on the sanction list. So a lot going on as it relates to the moves surrounding Bitcoin and the Russia-Ukraine situation. We're also, of course, keeping our eyes on the Bitcoin adoption. Interestingly here, Charles Schwab has filed with the SEC to launch an ETF to give their clients exposure, anybody who would buy this ETF, give them exposure to companies that either use or have some type of use of cryptocurrencies or blockchain. What's interesting to me about this, if you are an all-in crypto investor, you believe that every company will have some type of exposure to crypto. Just think back to the internet days where a lot of companies would say, oh yes, we use the internet, and then there were the non-internet companies. The real crypto believers believe that everybody will. And it's interesting that Charles Schwab is creating an ETF that will embody companies that use some type of service of cryptocurrencies. And I believe that they're calling it a Schwab Crypto Economy Index. In addition to that, we're just keeping our eyes on the use of Bitcoin in the Ukraine and Russia situation. And on a positive note, which I'll end it on, so far I understand that that Ukraine has received $35 million in donations in crypto. That is according to Elliptic. Nima, I'll leave it there. Back to you.
Always good to end on a positive note. Thanks for that, Catherine. For more analysis and news on the markets, be sure to tune in to Catherine Murray on The Buck Stops Here. All right, well, meanwhile, U.S. employers added over 678,000 jobs in February, which is another solid gain that underscored the economy's robust health. The Labor Department's report on Friday also showed that the unemployment rate dropped from 4% to 3.8%, extending a sharp drop in joblessness as the economy has rebounded from the pandemic recession. Well, this comes as Canada's economy deals with inflation. The governor of the Bank of Canada acknowledges that the quarter-point increase in the bank's key policy rate will mean higher interest rates for households and businesses. Tiff Macklem says higher interest rates are needed now to fight inflation. He added any delay would be even more costly. He also says the bank's benchmark rate will need to rise further. Mr. Macklem says a potential 0.5 percentage point hike could happen if senior decision makers feel they need to move more quicker or more forcefully. Moving to Alberta now, where the provincial government is renewing and expanding its restrictions on coal mining in the Rocky Mountains. The United Conservative government's earlier decision to revoke a 1976 protection policy sparked such a public outcry that it paused the sale of exploration leases. We'll be right back after the break with a look at news from around the world on Forum Daily, so stay with us. We'll be back shortly. The International Atomic Energy Agency says the building hit by Russia at Europe's biggest nuclear power plant was not part of the reactor. Director General Rafael Mariano Grossi says Russia hit a training center at the Ukrainian plant. No radiation was released and crews put out a fire. Ukrainian officials have said Russian troops took control of the overall site, but Mr. Grossi says the Ukrainians were in control of the reactor. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and other world leaders have condemned the attack, which Russia claims as a cause of arson, not artillery fire. The UN Security Council is responding to Russia's attack on Ukraine's largest nuclear power plant and is going to hold an emergency open meeting later today. The US, the United Kingdom, France, Ireland, Norway, and Albania asked for the meeting so they can get a briefing from the International Atomic Energy Agency. Russia's shelling of the nuclear plant has prompted widespread international concern and condemnation. Meanwhile, the International Organization for Migration now says 1.2 million people have left Ukraine. The United Nations says this could become the biggest refugee crisis this century, and it's predicting as many as 4 million people could leave as Russia continues its assault. The European Union is now granting people temporary protection and residency permits. With the Russian invasion of Ukraine in its second week, the UN's Human Rights Council has voted 32 in favor and 2 against setting up a panel of experts to monitor human rights in Ukraine. Only Russia and Eritrea were opposed, and 13 countries abstained. Yesterday, Russia and Ukraine reached a tentative agreement to set up safe corridors to evacuate citizens and deliver humanitarian aid to the country. A handful of cities are without heat, and at least one has very limited supplies of food and water. Meanwhile, it'll be harder for those within Russia to know the true extent of the attack on Ukraine. Russia's state media regulator is blocking access to the websites of 5 international media organizations. State news agency RIA Novosti reported Friday that the blocked websites include those of the BBC, Voice of America, and Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. The sites were blocked for hosting what the state media regulator told RIA was false information about Russia's military actions within Ukraine. This is including reports of attacks on civilians and the Russian military's losses. The 5 named organizations, also including Latvia-based Russian-language website Meduza and German broadcaster Deutsche Welle, are among the largest foreign news outlets with Russian-language news operations. Tragedy in Pakistan, where at least 56 people have been killed and dozens wounded as a powerful bomb exploded inside a Shiite Muslim mosque in the northwestern city of Peshawar. 2 attackers opened fire on police officers outside the mosque, and one made it into the mosque and detonated the bomb. Many of the injured are in critical condition, and the death toll is expected to rise. Moving to South Korea now, where thousands of people have fled their homes as a large wildfire ripped through an eastern coastal area and temporarily threatened a nuclear power station before being driven away by winds. Around 1,000 firefighters were battling the blaze amid strong winds and focusing their efforts on preventing it from reaching a liquefied natural gas facility. Nearly 4,000 people fled their homes as the fire spread, but most of them had returned as of Friday evening. There are no immediate reports of injuries or deaths. In Tanzania, opposition leader Freeman Mbowe was freed on Friday after spending more than 200 days in prison for terror-related charges. He and 3 other co-accused people had faced charges of conspiracy to commit terrorist acts, providing funds to commit terrorist acts, participating in a terrorist meeting, and possessing property for the commission of terrorist acts. Religious leaders and other opposition figures, including the exiled Tundu Lissu, had asked President Samia Suluhu Hassan to drop criminal charges that they described as baseless. Well, we end our cast with a 22-year-old Korean-American student's thesis that has caught the attention of Hollywood and theater producers. Julia Ryu at Harvard University is hoping her senior thesis pushes Disney to make its next princess Korean. She made her thesis into a full-length Disney-style musical inspired by a Korean folktale and has been releasing snippets of it on TikTok since January. She has also gained online supporters who have created visuals and animations to help bring Shimcheong, a folktale, to life. Sounds like something I'd enjoy watching. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily.